It matters not whether you win or lose until you lose. Never lend money to someone with amnesia. Don't mess with people who do crossword puzzles in ink. When a doctor wants to be paid in advance, expect bad news. And then my favorite, when your mother is mad and asks, "Do I look stupid?" Don't answer. Words of wisdom, we hear them all the time. But wisdom of God is a different kind of wisdom. It's not an earthly wisdom. It's a wisdom of how it is we live as God's people in God's world. And sometimes we get it confused, as was said before. It's not easy to be wise in the wisdom of God all the time. As a matter of fact, it's pretty tough to be there much of the time. Jack was a big man who always seemed to have a smile on his face. In fact, joy and happiness seemed to bubble up in his life. His happiness was so genuine that others discovered that joy and happiness increased in their lives when they were just around him. But why shouldn't he be happy? He had a good family, a lovely wife, 2 college-age daughters. He had a large home in the country. He was active in his church. He was the vice president of a large defense-oriented company and was paid in a 6-figure salary. He seemed to have it made. One day, without warning, he was called into the boss's office and fired. He was devastated. He had invested his life in the company, he had worked his tail off, he had helped the company grow, and now they were letting him go. Financially, he was set for life, but he was devastated that his company would let him go in the prime of life. For weeks, he was lost and did not know what to do. His self-confidence was replaced with frustration. His friendly attitude changed to one of bitterness. Anger and emptiness, he felt, even made him consider suicide. After weeks of feeling helpless and not knowing what to do, Jack began to take an inventory of his life. His wife, who had been his high school sweetheart, still loved him. His children, who were in college, had excellent grades. He was still a respected member of the community. His only real problem had been that he allowed the anger and bitterness and rejection to wage war within his soul. Once he stopped dwelling on what was wrong in his life and started looking at what was right, once he understood that his only real problem centered on the way he looked at himself, once he stopped waging war within himself, Jack was wise enough to realize that he was on his way to living an effective life. And what is the secret of effective living? The writer of Proverbs paints a beautiful panoramic view of wisdom being the secret of effective living. Wisdom is depicted as being the first thing God created. An essential characteristic for every man or woman, if they're going to experience any joy in living. The writer of the Proverbs expressed this very clearly when he wrote, "Happy is a man who listens to me." That's wisdom. "Watching daily at my gates, waiting beside my doors. For he who finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord." It's a tantalizing glimpse at wisdom, and sometimes some things in our lives which throw our lives apart and keep us from the wisdom of the ages, the wisdom of the creation, the wisdom of God. Wisdom is clearly portrayed as an appeal for men and women to discover the secrets wisdom offers as a high reward to those who follow her ways. A reward not just in money and health, perhaps not in money and health at all, but a reward of wisdom, an effective way of living. And oftentimes we search for wisdom, and sometimes in that searching we give in to the wisdom of the world as well. I'm reminded of an angel appeared at a college faculty meeting. Now that's awesome enough, okay? And when that angel was there, she told the dean of students that in return for his unselfish, exemplary behavior, the Lord was going to award him with the choice of infinite wealth, or wisdom, or beauty. And without hesitating, the dean selected infinite wisdom. "Done," said the angel. And then the angel disappeared into a cloud of smoke with a bolt of lightning. As they sat there, all heads sitting at the table turned towards the dean. And they were just quiet as quiet could be. Nothing was being said. And finally, one of the persons sitting next to the dean kind of elbowed him and whispered, "Say something." The dean looked at them and said, "I should have taken the money." Sometimes when we even want to be wise in the wisdom of God's creation, we find ourselves in the situation of saying, "I really want what the world says is wise." Sometimes it's not easy. It's not easy to really want the wisdom of God. And so there's a story, this one I don't think is true as well, but it's a story about Socrates. And a young proud man that came to Socrates, and he was looking for wisdom. He walked up to the philosopher, who was young and muscular at that time, and he said, "Oh, great Socrates, I come to you for wisdom." And Socrates recognizes a pompous numbskull when he saw him. He led the young man through the streets to the sea, chest deep in water. And then he asked, "What do you want?" "Wisdom, O wise Socrates," the young man said with a smile. Socrates put his strong hands on the man's shoulders and pushed him under the water. 30 seconds later, Socrates let him up and said, "What do you want, sir?" "Wisdom," the young man sputtered. "Oh, great and wise Socrates." Socrates grabbed him again by the shoulders and pushed him under. 30 seconds, 35 seconds, 40 seconds. Socrates let him up. The man was gasping, and he asked the young man, "Young man, what is it that you want?" Breathing heavy breaths, followed by some wheezing even. "Wisdom, oh wise and wonderful Socrates, wisdom." Socrates jammed him under the water one more time. 30 seconds, 40 seconds, 45 seconds, 50 seconds, 55 seconds. Let him out of the water, and he says, "What do you want?" "Air!" The young man screamed, "I need air!" Socrates said, "When you want wisdom, as you have just wanted air, then you will have wisdom." Wisdom is a choice. But wisdom is a difficult choice, a hard choice. It's a choice that we really struggle with in our lives. Wisdom is something that is that is always there as a choice. We are not saved through wisdom. We're saved through grace, thank God. But wisdom is that gift that God gives us that enables to live our lives in the midst of the confusion of our world. Wisdom is the gift that God gives us in creation, in the beauty of creation, in the beauty of God's love, that gift that God gives us so that we might know the power and presence of the Creator in the midst of a world that seems to go haywire at times. You'll enjoy this. Especially this service that does the liturgy. Last Sunday, I did my first pulpit supply. I went to Platteville Lutheran Church, which was out in Manuka, and led worship for that congregation. A country congregation, sitting in the middle of a cornfield is the church. Across the street from the church is a cemetery and the parsonage. Nothing else around. Right out in the middle of the country. I hadn't been in one of those churches for 20 years. And so I went and I was going to be preaching and leading the worship service there for this congregation. And so I brought my robes along because it's kind of usual that they had the robes. They had the liturgy, the sung liturgy that they had there. It was one that we used 5-10 years ago here on a regular basis, and so I went out there and I thought I knew it quite well. Okay, I looked at my book, and you had to use a book. It wasn't like in the bulletin, you had to use a book. And so I get into the worship service, and we get just about ready for a worship service, and the deacon from the church comes and says, "Pastor, the organist is not here yet." Well, I always get thrown in confusion when there's problems right at the beginning of worship. And I says, that's all right. I sing loud enough. I'll lead the singing. And I just said, we'll just pick a second hymn because I don't know the hymn you chose for a second hymn. So I'll just pick another one and we'll go that way. And 5 minutes before the service was going to start, the phone rang and it was the organist. She says, "I'm on my way. I'll be there. Just hold off just a little bit." Apparently the deacon didn't want to hold off any. And so she was the one that made the announcement at the beginning of the service. And she made all the announcements, and then they had the confession and forgiveness up in front of the service. So I went out there. While I was doing the confession and forgiveness in the congregation, of course, the organist came and flipped open the top of the organ and started putting buttons and all that kind of stuff. So by the end of confession, when everyone had finally been forgiven, the organist started playing the opening hymn, so she was there for the opening hymn, and that was just grand. But it just kind of, it takes you back a little ways. You go, oh man, am I glad that kind of pulled that out. I don't have to sing for the whole congregation. And so then we went through the Kyrie, and we got to the Gloria, and I was up by the altar, and did the Kyrie, we started going into Gloria, and the number on the bulletin and the number on the page there were the same, but the music that the organist was playing was not. I could not figure out what song she was playing. I was standing in front of the altar, looking at my book, trying to listen for some music coming from the congregation. They weren't singing. And so I stand there looking at my book like a deer in the headlights. Just like that, and trying to listen to the music and trying to figure out. I never got to sing one note of that Gloria. I just stood there, dumbfounded, looking at that book, and I looked like an idiot. I'm thinking, here you are, gone into a congregation, and they're there because they think I'm retired anyway, and they think my mind is retired now. And I'm standing there staring at a book, and what goes through my mind is, I'm making a total fool out of myself. I've been in ministry for 40 years, I can't even lead a worship service. What are people thinking of me? Oh, earthly wisdom. What are people thinking of me? And I started sweating. And finally, thank God, the glory got over. And when it did, all of a sudden there was a touch of God's Spirit that somehow blew through my head, that was so shaken up about what they were thinking about me. And that word that blew through my head, that wisdom that blew through my head, was the voice of God saying, it's not about you, stupid. Worshiping God is not about you. Gathering people together and praising God, it's not about you. It's about me. It's about praising me. And so I took a deep breath and went on with the rest of the service. God's wisdom sometimes strikes us in places where we don't expect